The electoral silence continued in Argentina one day before the open, simultaneous, and mandatory primary elections are scheduled to be held on Sunday. In northern China, 2 people died, 16 are missing, and 23,000 had to be evacuated on Saturday morning due to the flash floods, a mudslide in the Jilin province. In Israel, the number of Palestinian inmates protesting against their administrative detention raised to 13. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Alena Rosabal from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. The electoral silence continues in Argentina one day before the open, simultaneous, and mandatory primary elections are scheduled to be held on Sunday. After the end of the campaign closing activities, the electoral calendar is moving forward as planned for an electoral event that will define the presidential tickets of all parties involved. Expectations are growing among the more than 35 million citizens eligible to vote, while the distribution of electoral material has already begun. After Sunday's primary election, each political space will finally decide its official candidate for the general elections to be held on October 22nd. And we say in Argentina, from where our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Santiago Correy, give us more details about Sunday's primaries.
An electoral roll of 35,815,436 eligible voters, some citizens do not know with what expectations they are waiting for the elections to settle the presidential primaries.
It seems to me that this country had a hard time during the period in which we could not vote. Many people sacrificed a lot to achieve that we could exercise this right, and that makes me realize the importance, and I enjoy it for that reason. I think it is important and I enjoy it because it is a nice exercise that unites us all.
I don't have much to say about the elections. Personally, I think it's a bit of a necessary expense. It's more than anything a political test, so that they know more or less how the elections are going to be. I'm not going to vote in these elections. It's a personal decision.
One of the general concerns is the level of voter turnout.
They have to go to vote because it is the only right, the only thing we have to be able to decide something good for us. They cannot stop voting. It is the only thing we have. You cannot say, we are not going to vote for this because we are not interested in it. We all have to be interested because everything happens through politics in our lives. I'm not asking people if they are going to vote. I'm telling you in particular, I think it is a citizen's duty, so I'm going to go. I'm going to vote and I'm going to support the candidate that I think it is the right one.
Those who are convinced of their active participation invite society to reflect.
Please do not believe that they are telling you the truth. They are lying to you. The other time that they lied in a different way, and we already lived through those for years, and that is why we are in this situation. That's all. Unfortunately, since Macri depoliticized, we all know what is good and what is bad in politics. We know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. Here, they tell you that all of them are nothing. None of them are good. And they think that the only possible chance are through politics. There is no other way.
Next Sunday, August 30, 40 years after the return of democracy, 18 million women, 17 million men, and almost 1,000 non-binary people will be able to vote in the elections throughout the country.
Santiago Correy, teleSUR, Argentina.
On Friday, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva announced the relaunch of a major $348 billion infrastructure investment program, saying he hopes it will help Latin America's biggest economy get back on the path to growth. Projects under the Public-Private Growth Acceleration Pact, PAC, will target energy, road construction, access water and sewage, healthcare, internet access, and education. Previous version of the program in 2007 and 2010 during Lula's first term and second terms had mixed success in the number of planned projects had to be stopped due to the lack of financing. The government now plans to invest about $265 billion until the end of Lula 4 years term in 2026 and an additional $83 billion thereafter.
Brazil's growth will return to being correct and accelerated, but it needs to go further. It will have to be sustainable. We cannot think of any form of economic growth or wealth generation that isn't green and sustainable.
On Thursday, Brazil's Supreme Federal Court issued a ruling that annuls the evidence presented by the Odebrecht company against the former Vice President of Ecuador, Jorge Glass. The communique recalls that Glass was unjustly convicted in Ecuador while explaining that the annulment is based on the fact that the evidence was handed over without judicial authorization and without respect for due process. In this sense, Jorge Glass' defense, led by the international law firm, challenged the validity of Odebrecht evidence before the federal court and demonstrated the illegality of the evidence. According to his lawyer, Glass' case highlights the trend of lawfare in Latin America, defined by the Lawfare Observatory of the Latin American Strategy Center for Geopolitics, SELAC, as a political war through judicial and media channels. In Ecuador, family, friends, and supporters bid farewell on Friday to Fernando Villavicencio. According to local media, the wake was held privately at an exhibition center in the country's capital, Quito, without access to the public. During the ceremony, police forces were deployed to safeguard the security of family and friends of the presidential candidate. Later, a supporter of the assassinated presidential candidate gathered at the public memorial event, while his family held a mass at the cemetery where he would be buried. Villavicencio, a former lawmaker, anti-crusade and anti-corruption journalist, was gunned down as he left a campaign event on Wednesday evening, less than 2 weeks before the election. The murder has led some Ecuadorians to wait whether they will vote on August 20 and has made an unsettlement election event harder to forecast. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English while you find news in different formats, new days, and more. Other studies coming up, stay with us. Welcome back. In El Salvador, residents of Santa Marta in the department of Cabañas demanded the prosecutor's office to withdraw criminal charges against 6 community leaders accused of war crimes. The document addressed to the Attorney General Rodolfo Delgado sets out the reasons why they request the withdrawal of the charges and their release. The text is supported by at least 20 national and international organizations that support the withdrawal of the accusations. It also details that 7 months after the arrests, there is no evidence of participation in crimes, and they also consider that behind the process is the intention to criminalize human rights defenders and environmentalists. In Peru, a 48-hour strike called by the union workers at Brazil's La Pampilla refinery demands labor rights violations, while some artisanal fishermen are still waiting a higher compensation for the 2022 oil spill. The Spanish company Repsol has still not paid for the environmental damage it caused to the state due to the oil spill in January 2022, nor has been compliant with the labor rights of its workers who had begun a 48-hour strike. Since the oil spill took place, the artisanal fishermen in the affected areas no longer receive the same income, and although the company has made significant profits, Repsol's attitudes toward the demands of its workers is one of indifference and procrastination, only agreeing to dialogue when extreme measures are taken, such as the 48-hour strike. In northern China, 2 people died, 16 are missing, and 23,000 had to be evacuated on Saturday morning due to the flash floods and mudslide in the Jilin province. Heavy rains and flood caused first by Typhoon Doksuri and then by the recently arrived Typhoon Kanun have resulted in damages worth millions, from thousands of hectares of destroyed crops to thousands of collapsed houses. The record rains that have recently lashed northern China have left a total of at least 78 people dead, according to a report released by the authorities. Beijing alone reported 33 deaths, while the neighboring province of Hebei reported 29 deaths. Meanwhile, rescue teams continue the search and rescue of missing people, while thousands of officials start cleaning and designification tasks. The largest permanent lagoon in Drought Head, south Spain's the Naga Natural Park, home of one of Europe's largest wetlands, has completely dried out for the second summer in a row. A huge patch of cracked wild earth has replaced the water of the Santa Olalla Lagoon, which usually houses abundant aquatic life and a huge colony of migration birds. According to the Spanish National Research Council, the lagoon, which once covered around 45 hectares, has been shrinking in recent years, but this is the first time that it has dried out for 2 consecutive seasons. Scientists blame the lagoon's disappearance on the prolonged droughts combined with the overexploitation of aquifers for farming and tourism. On Thursday in Bangladesh, the Director of General Health Services stated that a total of 2,959 people were diagnosed with dengue fever in the past 24 hours, the highest number in a single day so far this year. According to Health Portfolio, recently reported infections have increased in number of dengue cases, 78,000 in Bangladesh so far this year. In order to fight the rising number of dengue cases, Bangladesh health authorities have threatened measures to check the breeding of mosquitoes and conduct anti-larval operations. The June-September monsoon period is a season of dengue fever in Bangladesh, which is considered a high-risk nation for mosquito-borne diseases. In Myanmar, at least 5 people were killed and more than 40,000 were displaced due to the floods caused by heavy monsoon rains that affected 5 regions of the country. The director of the Ministry of Social Welfare, Relief and Resettlement, Lei Cho-Sin, said that some parts of Karen and Mon provinces are still facing an emergency due to a rising river water level following heavy rains that started 3 weeks ago. In turn, authorities offer food, drinking water, medicine, and other essential assistance to people sheltering in relief camps in Bago, Kanin, and Rakhine states. The United Nations says it has successfully transferred more than 1 million barrels of oil from the dilapidated Yemeni tanker. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres welcomed the news in a statement on Friday and stressed that the operation avoided that could have been a monumental environmental and humanitarian catastrophe. On the other hand, the UN Development Program head Ashim Steiner said the milestone meant that the core aspect of the year-long effort to address the threat posed by the tanker, often referred to as a ticking time bomb, was now over and removed the imminent and immediate threats that had become the focus of attention across the whole world. The safer floating storage and oil floating facility has been moved around 50 kilometers from the Yemen city of Hodeidah since the 1980s and has not been serviced since war broke out more than 8 years ago between Yemen's Houthi rebels and the government.
Today I'm very pleased and grateful to join the United Nations Secretary General, to join my colleagues in the United Nations system, but also with gratitude to the many who have helped to make this operation possible, and to report that we have completed the transfer of the over 1.1 million barrels of oil. This is a major disaster averted. It was a ticking time bomb, as many called it, and it could have destroyed hundreds of thousands of livelihoods. It could have affected the shipping up the Red Sea towards the Suez Canal. It could have destroyed biodiversity and fisheries for a quarter of a century.
On Friday morning, Russian authorities reported an explosion northwest Moscow. The mayor of the capital, Sergei Sobyanin, said that the blast has caused by unmanned aerial vehicles that tried to fly over the city. The Russian defense minister added that the drone was suppressed with the means of electronic warfare and crashed in a forest area in the west of the city of Moscow. The organization called the incident an attempt by the Kiev government to carry out a terrorist attack with an unmanned aerial vehicle. The defense minister assured that the debris of the unmanned vehicle did not cause any human or material damage. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, announced the dismissal of all military recruiting officers in the country. According to local media, Zelensky made the decision after a meeting with the National Security and Defense Council. During the meeting, the State Bureau of Investigations and the Kiev Security Service presented details of 112 criminal cases against draft war officials suspected of taking bribes and engaging in corrupt practices. We have a second short break coming up, but before we invite you to visit our YouTube channel at teleSUR English. There you'll be able to rewatch our interviews, stories, special broadcastings, and more. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell to set up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back. In Israel, the number of Palestinian immigrants protesting against their administrative detentions raised to 13. Some 1,132 people, including 18 minors, are locked up under the Israeli law used to arrest Palestinians for renewable intervals ranging from 3 to 6 months, on the basis of undisclosed evidence and even without access to defense lawyers. Let us recall that since the beginning of the year, some 60 Palestinian prisoners have refused to appear before Israeli military courts. However, numerous detainees held under the measure have begun hunger strikes for an indefinite period of time to demand their immediate release from Israeli forces. The Chief of Staff of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, will meet over the weekend in Ghana to discuss further action on Niger. Senior officials of the ECOWAS will meet in the Ghanaian capital to plan the activation and deployment of the force in charge of restoring constitutional order in Niger. The West African leaders approved the military intervention last Thursday. However, they also pointed out that they continue to hope for a peaceful solution to the crisis. France and the United States are among the countries that have expressed their support for the organization. On Friday, the African Union expressed its firm support for the decisions of the ECOWAS to restore the constitutional order in Niger after the coup d'etat of 26 July. The blood's reaction comes after the heads of the states and government of the West African Community met for its second extraordinary summit on Thursday and ordered to activate a standby force for a military intervention. The group, in turn, called on the Nigerian military junta to urgently put an end to the degradation of relations with the ECOWAS and the arrest of the deposed President Mohamed Bazoum. On Friday in Niger, thousands of coup supporters rallied near a French military base, headed after West African leaders said that they would take actions as part of the efforts to reinstate the country's deposed leader. Protesters near the base on the outskirts of the capital Niamey shouted "Down with France, down with ECOWAS," in reference to the Economic Community of West African States, which on Thursday approved the deployment of standby force to restore constitutional order. Many demonstrators waved Russian and Niger flags and yelled their support for the country's new strongman, General Abdourahmane Tiani. Protesters also rejected the presence of French troops and said ECOWAS decisions are being manipulated by France. Niger's new leaders scrapped defense agreements with France last week, with a hostile protest outside the French embassy in Niamey on July 30 prompted Paris to evacuate its citizens. In Niger, the construction of the $800 million Kandaji hydroelectric project has been halted by the Chinese contractor Hesuba Group, which claims that most of the funds have been frozen due to recurrent sanctions after the coup. In a letter dated 7 August, the group said it would halt operations and lay off its workforce, adding that they will redeploy workers again if financiers are secured. The dam, upon completion, is expected to boost the country's grid by 50%. Niger's population has experienced a vast lack of electricity, with only 4.3 million people having access to energy, as 90% of its population uses wood as a source of energy. The recent sanctions by the Regional Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has crippled Niger's economy. The dam was expected to be completed in March 2026 and produce over 130 megawatts of electricity that will be distributed both internally and in the neighboring countries. We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For Telesur English, I'm Ana Razabal. Thank you for watching.